welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Kimberly Brock is the best-selling author of The Last Book of Eleanor Dare, which was shortlisted for the Townsend Prize for Fiction, and The River Witch, recipient of the Georgia Author of the Year Award. She's the founder of Tinderbox Writers Workshop and has served as a guest lecturer for many regional and national writing workshops, including at the Pat Conroy Literary Center. A native of North Georgia, she now lives near Atlanta. Her latest novel, The Fabled Earth, is out now. Kimberly Brock, thank you so much for joining today, and congratulations on your latest novel, The Fabled Earth. Book list says Brock proves marvelously adept at intertwining mythic stories and contemporary reality. Lush, multi-layered writing begs to be read slowly as she gently unfolds the mysteries of the picturesque yet haunted Southern landscape. Author Linda Cohen-Leugman says Kimberly Brock's The Fabled Earth is a brilliantly layered, unforgettable story of memory, myth, and found family. I have never read a novel where the author's love of storytelling shines more brightly than this one. Author Constance Sayre says The Fabled Earth is a gorgeous, twisty, and tangled as Cumberland Island itself. Kimberly Brock has established herself as one of the most exciting voices in Southern literature today. And Sarah Addison Allen says The Fabled Earth is lush and vivid, with passages so beautiful they will break your heart and then turn around and mend it. It's a tour de force of a novel. You can always tell a born storyteller when you read one, and Kimberly Brock is the real deal. So with that, what can you tell us about The Fabled Earth?
Well, first of all, I think I need a t-shirt printed that says the real deal.
I love it.
When you read or you get those blurbs, it always just is, it's kind of hard to take. You're like, oh no. But I think when you respect an author, and all three of those ladies are some of my favorites, it gives you a little confidence in what you've done. So if they like it, I hope other people will too. This novel is my third novel, and it's set on Cumberland Island, Georgia. It's our southernmost island, and I think it's spooky. And when we went on our 25th wedding anniversary to Cumberland, it was the first time that I had been. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, if I was going to write a ghost story, this is the place. And I was also thinking a lot about just how we make heroes and myths on a global scale in our country, but also locally and regionally. And I was looking for a place where there would be an element of mythology, an old god, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought about Cumberland because the history of Cumberland is really long. And there have been lots of iterations of that sort of, who owns this place, who lives here, who calls it home, and then who takes it over and rebuilds and does the same thing over and over again. And you have all the things that you would expect on a southern coastal island with that history, except for one, the Gilded Age mansions that the Carnegie family built for their summer homes there. And they're so out of place. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, if I was looking for old gods, there they are. So that's where the book started for me. Those two ideas came together.
The novel intertwines historical fiction
Yes.
with Southern ghost stories, folklore, mythology. You talked about looking for those old gods. When I saw the pitch for this one, I was like, sign me up. What do you find particularly intriguing about folklore and Southern folklore in particular?
I have always loved it. I like the idea of it, like academically. I like the idea of where it comes from and how it's if you study folklore, you understand that it's how stories travel because it's the origins are never the story that you're hearing where you're hearing it.
Mhm.
It's been passed down for generations, centuries, and it travels through families. It travels across oceans. It travels with immigrants. It travels, in a way that brings certain truths, whether the story has changed or not. And so I love that about folklore. To me, that's a ghost. That's a ghost story.
Mhm.
So I think when I was thinking about folklore in particular for this and Southern folklore, all of those elements come together on Cumberland. And then for one of my main characters, whose grandfather is a Scottish immigrant, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be interesting to bring those two regions together of my home state? I really like to write about the foothills. That's where I grew up. But
Mhm.
then I have this sort of I don't know, proclivity for the salt marshes. I love what they represent, and I love the metaphor of them, and I love the feeling of them when I'm there. And
Yeah.
so I kind of squashed those things together and I made my own folklore.
And ghosts and ghost stories have come up already a few times
Yeah.
with us in this conversation. What draws you to ghost stories?
So I grew up in a house in North Georgia that was built in 1912.
Oh, wow.
And when we moved in, it was in really bad shape. Like we didn't have insulation, and though we would sit in the kitchen and a cabinet would open and a cat would come out because there was no insulation around the pipes coming into the house, right? So this is an old
Mhm.
house. And
Mhm.
I knew that people had lived there before me. We moved in when I was 5. We remodeled that house until I got married in the backyard. So I really, this house is part of my family. It's almost a person to me.
Mhm.
And I was very aware, even from a young age, that other people had lived there before me. I could feel that in that house. It felt like it was built out of stories to me from these
Mhm.
other lives. We would play under the stairs, and you could see where other kids had been under those stairs before us and played and had their little story times and their flashlights, and we had an attic that was a walk-in attic, and I just was very aware. There was a man that came to the house one time and said he had been born in the front room. And it made me think
Wow.
about all of those lives that had come before me in that space. And I grew up with a grandmother who liked to tell ghost stories, and they were never the kind of ghost stories where I was afraid.
Mhm.
Um, the goal was to be thrilled, to marvel at the idea of what else might be out there that I don't understand, that's bigger than me,
Mhm.
that might outlast me, have come before me, go after me. And so those things I think are what compel me to think about ghost stories. I think when it boils down to it, it's about history.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we're haunted, spaces are haunted by their histories and personal histories. People are haunted by their personal histories. And I want I'm curious. I'm a curious person. So I want to know what came before and what comes next.
Yeah. speaking of histories, Cumberland Island, which is the setting for this novel, has a lot of history, a
Oh
lot
my
going
gosh,
on.
you're just swimming in it, right? You're drowning in it. I know.
Can you talk a little bit more about this particular setting and why you wanted to write about it?
So I'll back up and I'll say, and this will bring. I promise this will come together. Um, so when we went to Cumberland for our anniversary, for the 25th anniversary, it was the first time I'd been there, but it's not. I mean, I've been waiting to go there for a lot of years. I'd wanted to go there. My first trip to the ocean as a little girl was to St. Simon's Island.
Yeah.
And my father's best friend had a house there, and he actually brought my mother the Eugenia Price novels about the Georgia coast. And so, I started learning to read and to love Southern fiction and to love historical fiction from these novels about coastal Georgia,
Mhm.
even when I was really young. And I loved him, and so I loved St. Simon's Island. And, it was a personal connection there for me
Yeah.
with that. And it's nostalgic. When we got married, it was 1996. And that was in the summer. And then that fall in September, the news broke about JFK Jr. and Carolyn Bessette being married on Cumberland
Yeah.
Island. And
Mhm.
we all learned at the same time everybody else did that they had married there. And I remember just being thrilled by that. That was just so neat. Oh, they're on Cumberland Island. Look, and we had just gotten married in the backyard in this tiny little wedding. And now here's, this tiny little wedding on Cumberland.
Mm.
So we go there on our 25th and we're pulling up along the island, and it's spooky, and there's the trees and all the moss.
Awesome. Yeah.
And I realized it would have been their 25th wedding anniversary as well. And that struck me, right?
Mhm.
And so that was the thought. Oh, this is the place to write a ghost story. And so I start learning about Cumberland. And like I said, I'm just drowning in it because there's so much history to this place. And I am not a historian, I'm a storyteller. And so every story looks like the best story. This is wonderful. I want to tell everybody about this. No, now there's another one. And Cumberland Island, it starts out with the people living there who are indigenous, and then you have Europeans that come, and then you have battles, and you have missions, and just over and over, and generation after generation, there were Civil War history there. There's old plantations, of course, that have come and gone. There, all of the Southern history that you would expect, and
Mhm.
then in um, the 1880s. So we all know Andrew Carnegie.
Mhm.
We all know him and all of his philanthropy and his wealth. I'm writing a story about Tom, good old Tommy, the brother. Because this is the Southern story, right? So, so Tom's wife, they discover Cumberland, and she just really wanted to build a summer home there. And they come and they try and buy this place that there's a mansion there called Dungeness. And Dungeness Mansion has had two different iterations. The first one was a revolutionary home during that period. And at the time that Lucy and Tom come to the island, it's still that structure. It had burned, but it still existed, and there was a family that owned it. And they wanted to buy it. And long story short, because the Cumberland is a long story,
Mhm.
they buy it and they rebuild. They build a new Dungeness, but he only lives a few years. So then it's just Lucy and their 9 children. So Lucy's interesting to me though, because who goes from they're still magnates and they're living in this lap of luxury, and she wants to live for the summers on this wild island. It's not developed at all. Everything had to be brought in by boat. including ice, like everything had to come by boat. So the amount of money that went into just building Dungeness was incredible. But then she wanted to make it bigger, and she did. And then she built houses for her children, and an airstrip, and golf courses, and like it was sprawling. It was a playground for them. And as they married and had their own families, they had their own homes on the island. It has history from all of our American wars. And by the time I'm writing about it in 1959, of course, you know, several generations in, Lucy's granddaughter is mentioned in the novel, but all of that wealth, was whittled away when Andrew Carnegie died. He devoted. I mean, he gave all of his money away. His children got nothing. Thomas was a little more traditional. His kids all got a cut.
Mm-hmm.
But by that time, they had done whatever they were going to do with their money. And so the amount of expense it took to keep up what they had built, what Lucy had built on Cumberland, was just astronomical. And they had abandoned Dungeness, if you can imagine. It's this monstrous, beautiful place, and it was the heart of their family community there.
And they just left it?
They left it, and they moved furniture into the other homes. They couldn't afford to keep it up, to live in it. So it's a little spooky and gothic, for a fictional story, and I liked that.
Yeah.
And then in 1959, there was a fire that destroyed Dungeness, and they think it was arson, but nobody has ever known exactly who committed the arson. There are theories. There was a lot of people who were coming onto the island and poaching, and there was a lot of shotgun action going on. We are in the South after all. So it was, it's a good story. It was fun to just kind of poke around in all of that and find a way to tease out the little facts, because that history is so long. There's just so much. I mean, there were people, I couldn't even make things up. When you have that amount of wealth, and you're in a place where there are no rules except the rules that you make, it's a really fertile ground for some fiction, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, I also wanted to ask you about this town of Reverie, which is, I believe, sort of a mainland town close to Cumberland in the novel. But I didn't recognize, as a Georgia girl myself.
I'm here to recognize. We're going to
I'm listening to you, and
I'll straighten you out.
I didn't recognize that name, and I looked it up, and I couldn't find it. So was that a real town, or is that okay?
Nope. Fiction. So I always kind of start with a real place, and then I will fictionalize it, because it's so much easier for me. There's a lot of math and a lot of detail involved if you're writing about a real place.
Yeah.
And so it's more fun to pick and choose what you want to incorporate. So some of that little town is based on St. Mary's, Georgia. But mostly it's straight out of my imagination. I wanted it to represent a town in 1959 on the coast more than I wanted it to be a town,
Yeah.
And I like that Cumberland has this, it's like time is just overlapping and flowing around you. You don't know where you are. You don't know what year it is. And the time is just passing. What day? Who cares? It's your Cumberland. And so I wanted a place that felt very particular and very much like a small town, 1959. But I didn't want it to be something that was too real, because I wanted it to also feel just a little bit mythical.
Yeah. This is a dual timeline novel. We're in the 1930s and then in the late 1950s.
Yes.
There's quite a cast of characters.
A
It's
lot,
told
yeah.
from the point of view of 3 different women, and yet you do this wonderful job of keeping the reader oriented in the story and really pulling us through with this wonderful tension, even though we love taking time to stop and look around in this landscape. How did you figure out the structure?
Well, see, there's this thing about being a woman, and in particular, I think being a, a female storyteller,
Mhm.
and then you add on top of that that I'm a Southern female storyteller. Um, I don't think linearly. I think in circles,
Mhm.
and the older I get, the more frustrated I get with this, by the way. Like, I am like a moth. I start at one place and I dart around, but I know
Mhm.
where I'm going and I'm going to get there. And if you just
Mhm.
follow me, all of it connects by the end. And the older I get, I will dart and I'll think, where am I? What was I talking about? So hopefully, as I'm doing this, as I'm writing, I'm not losing you. But
You're not.
it's cyclical. Women's lives are very, we live in a cyclical, with a cyclical awareness of life. You know, from birth to death, we have our children, we take care of our parents. I don't know, I haven't studied it, but my theory is that that's what's in play here, because I'm thinking about these 3 women in those terms, in the
Mhm.
cyclical nature of where they are in their lives and what's happening to them.
Mhm.
And there not being a beginning or an end to those stories, that they just keep rolling along.
Mhm.
Just like I'm thinking about the island, just like I'm thinking about the different stages that those 3 women are in. And on top of that, the the ability to reflect on the past for Cleo.
Mhm. Mhm.
When I looked at that landscape, one of the things that was, I guess, a point of origin for me when I was trying to identify what am I going to say about this landscape, was that river, and how the the river has a spot in it that they call the dividings, where the tide runs in both directions. And I think that is such a beautiful picture for what it is to be human. And
Mm.
maybe also it relates to what I was saying about, being haunted by our history and wanting to know what came before and what comes next.
Yeah.
And so all of those things were connecting in my mind, and I thought, that's what makes us human.
Mhm.
That ability to think ahead, to dream, and
Mhm.
then the ability to reflect, to remember. And so
Mhm.
I wanted Cleo, who's my main character, to be doing both of those things, to show her humanity. All of these characters are in a position where they make really bad decisions and they make really good decisions, and they don't do either one because they're heroic or brave or courageous or right. Often they are just stumbling through them and then reflecting afterwards, oh my gosh, what did I just do? Was that the right thing? Was that the wrong thing? And i I liked that idea for Cleo to have the 2 different chapters, the 2 different timelines, so that she could do both those things, look back
Mhm.
and look ahead
Mhm.
into the book. So I ended up with 3 women, 3 different stages of their lives, and 2 timelines for one of them.
It works great.
I hope so.
When you're writing, so when you're in it and you're in that process of writing, are you are you working maybe on Cleo's timeline? Are you working maybe just on Cleo one timeline at a time? Or are you kind of jumping around as you're in the process of writing and putting everything together and just sort of seeing what comes up for you that day? What does that look like?
I am I'm I want to be. I want to be. a really organized writer. You know, I'm the oldest daughter. I'm a type A. I really like for things to be kind of clean and put where they need to be, and I like the aesthetic of my office to feel good when I write. But I'm not entirely a rule follower. I like to know what they are so that I can kind of skirt around them a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And that applies to how I write. I think what I know I do is that I will start with, usually it's a place, but often it's a question. And the problem with saying it's a question is sometimes it's the fact that I don't know what I'm writing about yet. That may be the question, but I'll start with writing on notepads, and I'll write my way into the story until I have a voice. So the person, that voice will present. And once I start kind of figuring out who that person is, for some reason at that point, I usually know the end.
Hmm.
I write the end. I know that sounds insane. It feels insane because I don't know it until I know it, and then I just
Mhm.
do. It's a
Wow.
subconscious thing. So
Mhm.
then I go back and I'll start at the beginning. And I usually start at the beginning for all of the characters, and I start out linearly. That doesn't mean that I stick to it. Sometimes I'll jump ahead, jump around. Um, but I will tell you the truth. Often finish a manuscript and turn it into my agent, and she says, "Where's the rest?" It's happened twice now.
Really?
And it happened with this one. So I think that I have done what I wanted to do, and I will leave out almost the most important parts of the story. I don't know why I buried them, but I do. And
Hmm.
with this in particular, there were some of the 1932 um, chapters for Cleo that I
Mhm.
had to go back and write, completely write. I hadn't written them at all. And we would have a whole phone call, and I would say, "Ah, oh, damn it, I did it again," because I think I have done the whole thing, and she'll
Did
find,
you know it? Did you know the information that went into it?
yeah,
Did you know it in? Okay.
yeah.
So you knew
And
the
I've
story.
sat on it, and I
Okay.
don't know why I do that. She's like, "I know you know this. Why is this not in here?" And I don't know why. And so I haven't figured out what I'm doing, why I'm doing that. I don't know, but I do it, and then she straightens me out, and I'm very lucky that she sees it because, like you said, it's not that it's not there, but I
Mhm.
often don't put it on the page to begin with for some reason. And with my first book, I had an editor that caught something in a scene, and I didn't agree with her. Um, she felt like something was missing. No, I didn't agree with her. And then I addressed it, and I realized it was something really personal,
Hmm.
um, that I was writing about. It wasn't the scene itself; it's what I was putting into the scene emotionally,
Yeah.
and I was avoiding it. So I'm sure it has something to do with that psychology. But
Yeah.
yeah, so it's like a puzzle. It
Mhm.
comes together like a puzzle.
Have you always been a writer?
I have always been a storyteller. I got in trouble in elementary school for the stories I made up on the playground. I told the kids on the playground, we had a sawmill in the woods behind the playground. And when they built that playground behind the school, they had just pushed all the dirt up into these mounds, and the dirt had stayed there right at the edge of the woods.
Mhm.
And so we like to run over those mounds. They had grown weeds, just
Mhm.
unkept. And I told them all it was burial ground. And that there were ghosts in the woods. That's what we could hear back there because we could hear the sawmill, but we didn't know what it was. And I ended up having to apologize to my class because I scared some kids who couldn't sleep at night. They were worried about what was out on the playground at school. So I would say I
They
started
should have
early.
thanked you.
So I think I started early, with that. I made my brother and sister, I would write plays, and I made them long suffering siblings have to sit through that, and made them try and act it out. And they did not want to or care to. Um, So I've always been writing. I never thought that I would publish. Never. I
Really?
My dad always said, and I'm that one. I'm the artist. I'm the creative in the family. I'm the one that failed algebra 3 times in college, right?
Mm.
Just trying to get through. And he always said, just have a job where you'll have good health insurance. And I thought, well, you won't get that as a writer. You won't get that as an actor. And I actually was a double major, theater major in education in college my first year. And then I ended up getting my degree in education. All of that, though, even when I was first teaching, I was teaching kids with behavior disorders and learning disabilities, and they were quite severe.
Mm.
And I did the first play that the kids at that little private school had ever performed. We had a children's theater right next door, and I went over and asked if I could bring the kids over and use the stage and the costumes. So stories have always been in play.
Mm.
And then when my children were little, because my first two were 16 months apart and I was insane, they would nap and the internet was kind of new.
Mm.
And just, I wrote an email. It was the first email I ever wrote to an author because I picked up her book and her email was on the back of the paperback and told her how much I liked the book. And
What book
we
was
found
it?
out she went to UGA, by the way. We talked about this a minute ago. You're UGA. And so we found out we had some things in common and we'd emailed a little bit. And she said, have you ever thought about writing anything? And I said, I mean, I wrote things. I won like language arts fairs, if that's what you mean, in elementary school. And she said, well, write a short story for this collection that me and some other authors are putting together and let me see it. And so I did. And I had no idea. I mean, nothing. I knew nothing about writing or publishing. And I wrote this story that was inspired by a memory from my mom's childhood. And I kind of sweetened it up a little bit because it wasn't such a sweet memory. And I said, so what do I do with this when I'm done? And the author said, well, send me a synopsis. And I said, okay. And then I Googled synopsis. I had no idea. And I wrote a synopsis that was longer than the story. Sent that to her, which I still do, by the way. I'm terrible. So I sent that to her and she said, this sounds great. When it's ready, send it to me. So I hit send because I already wrote the story and she bought it. So I thought, well, that was easy. I'll write a book. And it was not easy. I wrote many books before I published another. But no, I did not know. I did not know that I would ever publish. It still doesn't feel real when I see my books on a shelf, especially if you walk in somewhere where I don't know any. They don't know me. I don't owe them a favor. They don't owe
Yeah.
me a favor. And there's a book. It's still like magic to me. Yeah.
Can you say who the author was?
Deborah Smith.
And what was the book? The
Place
original
to
one?
Call Home. We were living in Seattle when I
Mm-hmm.
picked that book up.
Mm-hmm.
So I was homesick. And it's, her bio's there that she's a Georgia author.
Uh-huh.
And it mentions I don't know why I'm telling you this on a podcast. It talks about chicken houses. And I grew up on a farm and my grandfather had these industrial chicken houses, right? And we worked in them. I worked in them every weekend. And I remember reading that and just being so homesick and crying over chicken houses. And she was like, oh, honey, if you're sad about that, tell me a story. You need some
You never
therapy.
know where you're going to get your start then. Well, then you went on and you said it was some time before you published a novel, but you did in fact publish
Did.
many. So how did that come about? Did you end up just keep going, get an agent? How
I
did that
did.
happen?
Well, I did. And she's still part of this story. Deb Smith is still part of this story.
Hmm.
So I got my first agent, and we went round and round and round with submissions in New York. And,
Mhm.
it's a very Southern little literary book, my first novel. And we got lots of great feedback, but the no thanks. And I got frustrated. And so I emailed Deb Smith again. And I said, look, I don't want you to buy this. I just want you to tell me if it's really crap so that I can move on to the next thing. Because I really need somebody to say it's okay to just move on to the next thing.
Mm.
And she liked it and wanted to buy it for that same small press that published my short story. And I
Mm.
thought, well, thank God, I'll just get rid of it. So I sold that book to her, and that novel won the Georgia Author of the Year debut that year. So it wasn't crap.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, maybe I'll write another one. And I ended up switching agents at that point, and I signed with a very successful agent out of New York. And then I took forever to write my next book. And my vision for it changed. I'm a very slow writer.
Mm.
And she signed me on a chapter. And
Oh.
I I changed, my vision for the book changed, she changed, her vision for the book changed. And so in the end, when I had a finished manuscript, we parted ways amicably.
Mhm.
And I had a friend. I was very lucky. I had a really good friend who said, well, I have been talking to my agent about this book, and she would like to talk to you. And she wants to get on the phone. And I'm an introvert. I was like, do I have to talk on the phone? Really? Can we just email? And she said, no, she wants to talk to you on the phone. So I got on the phone with my current agent, and she talked to me for about 2 hours. And
Wow.
I signed with her, and we sold Eleanor Dare a few years later. And I love her. So, like I said, she knows the stories that I need to write that I haven't put on the page yet. So,
Yeah.
there's something to that kind of relationship. Um, it's neat. It's really neat to have somebody in your head like that you trust.
Yeah.
If you don't trust them or they don't get you, then it messes you up. You're
Mhm.
second guessing yourself. But I have a situation where I trust her, and she trusts me too. She's willing to let me lead with these crazy ideas and these big long convoluted stories and all these million characters that I'm going to throw on the page, and she believes that my moth brain is going to find the end. And so it works. It has worked.
What do you know now that you wish you had known before publishing your first book?
That it's okay to just write what I want to write, that I don't have to make it into something else to impress somebody.
Mm.
Um, I'm pretty much my personality, I'm pretty much who I am wherever I am.
Mhm.
And that's not necessarily because I'm a good person, it's just because I can't do it any other way. I've tried. So that translates and is something that I think has been an advantage for me. Um, I like everybody else. I have imposter syndrome. We all do as authors because we really are trying to tell a truth, right? And if you
Mhm.
put a truth out there, you're just waiting to get henpecked for it. Like
Mhm.
here it is, come and get me. And I think you have to be brave enough to know that's going to happen and still be okay with it. But I wish somebody had said to me that
Yeah.
you can just write what you know to write. Give yourself permission to do that, and don't worry about what the next guy thinks about that. You're learning as you go. Like what I wrote in this book, I hope if I'm still writing 10 years from now, I'm not writing the same thing. I hope it changes. I hope I change in the next 10 years. So you got to also give yourself forgiveness that it's not going to be perfect, because it's not supposed to be. You're supposed to be learning from what you're doing.
Do you have a favorite piece of advice for aspiring authors or early career authors?
Be peculiar
Hmm.
and be persistent.
I love that. Peculiar and persistent.
That's it.
I feel like I need to write that on a Post-it and put it on
Just
my computer.
be peculiar. Be yourself. Be a person who is not the same as the person sitting next to you. Embrace the peculiar people around you, because they're the ones that will be the most interesting, and they'll make you interesting. And be curious. Just don't get all in your own head, don't let it be so important. Enjoy it. You're making up stories for a living. Who gets to do that? you know Do I have insurance from this job? No, I do not. I got very lucky that I married my husband and he gives me health insurance. So I'm also very aware of that like that is a privilege, that I'm working from the situation that I'm living in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I try and always be aware of that and extend that privilege where I can to anybody I can help.
Right. We have a traditional final question.
Oh gosh, I should have watched the whole thing. I was watching one yesterday and I was like, well, crap, I'm going to repeat all her answers if I keep listening to this. So I didn't hear the very end.
Well, here it is. When the Fabled Earth is made into a movie or series, what do you think the theme song should be?
Oh my Lord. You are good. Like, I have this extensive, I know it's hard to believe that I couldn't whittle something down, right? Having read this book, you know how like organized, and I have this extensive playlist for this novel. I'm getting ready to put it in a newsletter. I don't know. I like Indigo Girls.
Ooh.
Salty South.
Yeah.
Listen to that one. That's like the first one on the playlist. But I'm telling you, for this book and the last book, all I have listened to is Brandi Carlile. I don't know, I feel like at some point I'll jump to something else. And I'm a great fan of hers, but I hear something in the themes, in her music, and in the music itself, that earthy, melancholic sound to it. So those, and she has a song that, gosh, what Allison Russell sings a song called "You're Not Alone." And I listen to that one a lot, and Brandy's in the background on that. So maybe that one.
Right. Kimberly Brock, thank you so much for coming on today. It has been such a joy getting to talk to you.
Been fun talking to you. I almost corrected your accent.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.